Good morning, students. Today we are going to start a new topic, deck. Okay, so this is one of the type of queue, deck. Okay, deck stands for double-ended queue. Okay, so what is the normal concept of queue? That means insert an element into the queue is rear end, and deletion, that means delete an element from the queue is front end. Okay, so that is the concept of normal queue. So that concept is explained in this paragraph. That means stands for double-ended queue. The insertion takes place from one end while the deletion takes place from another end. Okay, so queue has both ends are there. So one end is available from insertion, then another end is available from deletion. Okay, so where we insert the data, back end, that means the rear end. Okay, so rear end of the queue can insert the data, and front end we can use it to delete the data. Okay, so that is the concept. Okay, now deck, what do you mean by deck? So deck is linear data structure in which the insertion and deletion operations are performed from both end. Okay, so actually in this diagram is represent for deck. Okay, so listen, here you see a queue format, that means then 0 1 2 3 4. So these are the elements are arranged in order. So the arrow marks is represent for, so the up arrow is used to delete the element. So this arrow is represent for insert an element into the queue. So in this diagram, both end, that means front end and back end, that means front end and rear end. So both ends are used to insertion and deletion of element into the queue. So that is the main concept of double-ended queue. Okay, so double-ended queue means what? So we can insert and delete the data into the queue for available both ends. So that is the main concept of deck. Okay, so deck is a generalized version of queue. So deck, double-ended queue, because it is one of the type of queue. So it is generalized version of the queue, because what then insertion and deletions are available from both end. It is also referred to as a deck, that means double-ended queue, and it is referred to as generalized version of queue. Okay, then after to see the properties of queue. What are the properties of queue? Deck can be used both stack and queue, as it allows the insertion and deletion operations on both ends. Okay, so first property, so the deck is represent for the stack properties. Why? Because, so listen the diagram. So here both arrow marks, that means this is deletion, this is insertion. So where we insert or remove the data from the stack is always top of the stack. So both cases are available from one end. So in this case, explain about the stack concept. Why? Because insertion and deletion is always top of the stack. Okay, so that concept is performed here. So the first property of the deck is similar to stack. Okay, I think you can understand this concept, because insertion and deletion is done in one end of the queue. That means deck, double-ended queue. So the deck is also similar to stack property. Okay, then in deck, the insertion and deletion operations can be performed from one side. The stack follows LIFO rule, that means last in first out rule, in which both the insertion and deletion can be performed only from one end. So therefore we conclude that deck can be considered as a stack. Okay, so two concepts, insertion and deletions done in one end, so it considered as a stack. Okay, then in deck, the insertion can be performed one end and the deletion can be done in another end. Okay, so you remember one thing, double-ended queue, that means both ends. Okay, a queue has two ends are there. One end is rear end, then another end is front end. Okay, so in double-ended queue, both ends are available for insertion and deletion. Okay, we must delete and insert the data into the queue for both ends. Okay, so it is referred to as a queue and stack. Okay, the first concept I already explained, because one end is referred to insertion and deletion, so it is similar to stack. The second concept is insert a data into the queue, that is rear end. Okay, so we can insert the data into the rear end, so it is considered as a queue. Then where we remove the data from the queue, then front end of the queue. So the same property is applicable for double-ended queue, so it is also similar to queue properties. Okay, so in this point explain the same thing. Insertion can be performed one end and the deletion can be done in another end. So this is similar to queue. Okay, so which type of rules is following here? First in, first out. Okay, so therefore we conclude that the deck can be considered as the queue. Okay, the next, the double-ended queue, to perform two types of queues are there. One is input restricted queue, then another one is output restricted queue. Okay, so these are the two types of queues in double-ended queue or deck. Okay, so listen carefully. Input restricted queue and output restricted queue. So these are the two types of queues available from deck, double-ended queue. Okay, let us see the concept about input restricted queue. Okay, listen the point. The input restricted queues means that some restrictions are applied to the insertion. Okay, so input restriction means to apply some criteria or conditions into that queue. So what is that criteria? The input restricted queue, the insertion is applied to one end while the deletion is applied from both ends. Okay, so this is a diagram for input restricted queue. So listen, insertion restricted means insert a data into the queue is only one end. Okay, so this concept. Okay, so in a double-ended queue, input restricted queue, that means input means insertion, insert a data into the queue. Okay, so what type of restrictions are applicable here? One end must be insert the data into the queue, but both ends are used to remove the data. Okay, so that means deletion. Okay, so while deletion is applied from both ends, okay, insertion is applied from only one end and deletion from both ends. So that is the restriction of input restricted queue. Okay, can you clear about this concept? Input restricted queue means simply we can say input data, that means insert a data into only one end of the queue. At the same time, the deletion must be available from both ends. So that is input restricted queue. Then second concept, output restricted queue. So what do you mean by output restricted queue? So it means that same restrictions are applied to the deletion operation. That means just opposite of input restricted queue. What is that? Actually insertion is only one end of from that queue. But here the deletion is only one end of the queue. At the same time the insertion is possible from both ends. So that is a difference between input and output restriction. Okay, so we can simply understanding input restriction means input a data into only one end, at the same time the deletion is both ends. But output restriction of the data is the insertion is both sides are available and deletion is only one end of the double-ended queue. So that is the two types of queues in a double-ended queue. Okay, so then what are the operations? The following operations applied in deck. Okay, insert at front is the first operation, then deletion from the end, then second operation insert at rear, third operation delete from rear, so that is fourth operation. So these are four types of operations done in double-ended queue. Okay, so because just you recall about that, the double, what is the concept of double-ended queue? Because double-ended queue, that means yeah, an end, that means a rear end and front end. So both ends are used for the purpose of insertion and deletion. So insert at front, insert at rear, delete from end and delete from rear. Okay, so that is the four types of operation. Actually, insert at front, that means what? Insert an element into front end of the queue. Insert an element at front end of the queue. Okay, so at the same time, insert an element at the rear end of the queue. Okay, so insertion is available from both ends. At the same time, the deletion is also available from both ends. So deletion from end, that means delete an element from the end of the queue. And one more operation is the deletion from rear, that means delete an element from the rear end or back end of the queue. Okay, so that is the main function or main operations done in deque. Okay, so the next operation is speak operation. Then I'm stop here. Then next operation, that means speak operation, then is full of, is empty of. So that concept is continue to the next video. So I think you can get the clear idea about the deque, that means double-ended queue. Okay, so suppose you have any doubt, then you can clear through the telegram group. Okay, thank you.